We spoke about this in the last Parliament, in this committee. The last Commission made a little step in this subject. For us, this is a very touchy subject. It seems to us that the markets in Europe are divided into two parts, the East and the West. And that's why we have dual quality in foodstuffs. It seems that there are double standards here. The citizens in the West, we have access to better foods, and those in the East have access to worse foodstuffs. It probably doesn't have anything to do with food security, but it does have something to do with quality, and for us this is a very important issue.
Okay, the last question, Petros Kokalis from the GUE.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, for being with us. Not quite sure that the stages of economic development of Rosto are so useful in this age of rapid acceleration and in trying to beat the climate emergency clock with harnessing the digital revolution. So in this scheme of yours of 5 and 25 and the generational transformational need, maybe it's a little bit too long, the 25 years that you're looking ahead. And so how would you avoid locking ourselves in a generational investment in such a thing as fossil gas or so-called natural gas? And the second question is, what is your view on the economic opportunities in adaptation? Thank you very much for your time with us.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Officially, we have 2 minutes, but we'll give you a little bit more, 5 to 7 minutes, to reply to the questions in a summary method. Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for those contributions. I've noted down all of your questions. I'll reply personally because these are all very important questions. But perhaps I'll start with the last one. Investments have to be up to the level of the ambition. We've talked about this today. The Fair Transition Fund with my colleagues in the college, Mr. Gentiloni, we're trying to think about a mechanism so that we can have more ambitious investments using bonds, long-term bonds. We have the zero or negative interest rates at the moment, so we're working on instruments which can be a lever to flank this transition, because this is a very important project. We have to mobilize funds from all these stakeholders. We're very aware there are particular situations which allow us to go further. There's a question from Mr. Danton. There's no distinction for the Commission between citizens in the East and the West. I know about the criticism of foodstuffs. It's unacceptable, and I'll tackle that within my responsibilities. A point on the nuclear. If you're listening to me, I don't think he's put his headphones on. I'm afraid you might have to say it for a third time. I'm talking about nuclear. Thank you. Yeah. Identified the questioner. This is an important subject. Nuclear is an important source of energy for many countries in the Union. It's considered as a transition energy to reach the objective. There's a responsibility for states one of the elements in the energy mix with an ambition in the long term to achieve clean, zero carbon energy. And we've thought about this and attach the same importance as you. On AI and data, several questions have been asked about this. this is an area which is absolutely essential. I'll talk about the AI and data strategy. We're working on that at the moment. That's a request I made to the President to have, so that we can have an overall vision of the position of the Commission on a data strategy with the fluidity of data. As you said in your question, we have to have access to data, public data, but not just that. So there's a lot of work going on, and we have to set aside more time to that. The question that you asked are in line with the responses that we're working on today on ethics, but also on the aspect of innovation, research capacity and progress, and the use of data which are being produced in Europe. And I think algorithms are working on all this sort of data.
There were some other questions on hydrogen, green hydrogen. I can't respond to your figures. Let me say that without any further ado. I can't give you a detailed reply to those figures. I can send a reply to you. I'll check with my staff whether we can get you those figures. As for the staff needed, yes, I want a joint European project of interest on green hydrogen. Personally, I have every faith in the future of this sector. I think it's going to be of strategic importance and will allow us to tackle a number of transport and mobility issues and everything connected with them. But forgive me for not having those particular figures at the tip of my fingers. And then on non-toxic material cycle, well, there'll be a before and after here. We're going to have rules which will be extremely clear. Oh yes, it was your question, wasn't it? That's a very important element. We'll be issuing extremely clear rules. It's a very significant issue. And indeed, we've already discussed this with DG Grow. So we agree with you. It's already been addressed. And then Ms. Moretti, I think it was, put a question on research. You're quite right. As we want to get the whole continent up and running, the research effort is crucial. We'll need a very significant European budget for research. It's a collective endeavour. I trust you'll be providing support in the MFF to ensure that the research budget is maintained. Horizon 20 and all the other programmes are thinking about the Green New Deal. We must make sure that the range of funding available will meet your perfectly well-founded needs. Now, I've just heard about the question from the EPP member on buses in the Netherlands. I've just been told that in order to bid for the tender, they were actually bought in China. No doubt the rules, as you quite rightly point out, would not have been our rules. So there is an issue there, quite clearly. So I'm going to take a careful look at that. You can rely on me. We'll find ways and means of tackling that. We have trade defence rules if there's any suspicion of dumping. So please provide me with any information you have. Out of my toolbox, I'll see whether there's anything I can actually use in the near future. Reciprocity and access to public procurement. Well, I think that has got held up at the council. But of course, I'll try and make some headway on that. That's an issue that we want to take forward. On that specific case, within the existing rules, particularly regarding thank you for reminding me of that. I will pick that up with your colleagues. I'm I'm sorry I haven't managed to reply to each and every question. There was the point you touched on just now, of course, on migration. Well, I would say that we're going to need the skills. We're going to need more and more training to reach our goals. Of course, we will be bolstering our skill base within the Union. We have 440 million citizens of Europe, but it's our ambition to have growth in Europe. Population trends by 2050 suggest that we'll be looking at about 450 million people in Europe. So if we're to be competitive, of course, everything we're doing here will be part of the carbon neutral ambition, but we also want our whole continent to be more ambitious vis-a-vis a world that will have increased its population from 7.7 to 9 billion by the middle of the century. Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry for not having had enough time to reply to absolutely all the questions.
We're going to have a 1-minute break and then we start again on another hot topic with the CDC. So, we are going to resume our work. Before moving to the ECDC hearing, and thank you, Madame la Directrice, I will make a couple of announcements regarding the agenda. And the main one is that following the Brexit and the departure of our British colleagues, we have changed the numerical composition of the committees, and it was adopted in the plenary. And from today, the ENVI committee is composed of 81 members, so 81 members instead of 76 previously. Then we are in the middle of the process, as we have the numerical composition of the committee, but we do not have the nominative composition of the committee. That will be formally approved in Strasbourg next week. So a couple of political groups asked to postponed the votes we were supposed to have today, and we agreed to postpone the vote, and we will vote on the European semester opinion as soon as we have the full composition of the new composition of the ENVI committee with the new full members approved in Strasbourg. So that's the main announcement, and also I was requested by Véronique Riel-Lenoir to say a word on a group of visitors from the La région Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes from France. I don't know if they are still there or if they left, but they were more than welcome to the ENVI committee. So we can move to the second exchange of view and hearing today with the ECDC. So it's the annual and yearly exchange of view, but of course it goes and it comes in a very specific time with the coronavirus. So I asked the director to focus mainly, but not exclusively, but mainly her presentation on the coronavirus and where we are and your assessment of the level of threat and risk, or on the contrary, the level of the way it's properly handled within the EU and globally. But if you could, of course, still dedicate part of your press or the exchange of views and the questions on other topics, because the ECDC is not entirely about coronavirus. Thank you very much. Very timely exchange of view and hearing. So please, up to you for 10-15 minutes maximum, and then questions and answers.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, for inviting me to this exchange of views today with the ENVI committee. And I would particularly like to thank also our new contact MEP, Joanna Kopczynska, and the two representatives of the Parliament in our management board. I would like to welcome them as well, Sofia Masaj-Kukovic and Marilena Koppa. Ladies and gentlemen, this annual hearing, as the chair has highlighted, will have a specific focus. Nonetheless, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that even though we have a focus on coronavirus, the other viruses and bacteria that pose a threat to human health in Europe don't sleep. And I would like to reassure you that we still keep monitoring them, as may be illustrated by the fact that in the last month we published and worked on 4 risk assessments for the coronavirus and 3 other ones, 2 of them dealing with outbreaks of multi-drug resistant pathogens. And that is certainly a signal for the other threat that I will present today.
So they are trying to...
There is a technical problem.
Yeah. That's still? So they are trying to fix it.
Okay, I would like to draw your attention a bit back in history and remember the year 2003. We were at that time discussing another coronavirus, the SARS coronavirus. And that actually sparked the establishment of ECDC. Today, 15 years later, ECDC is an agency with 280 staff from 26 EU countries and an annual budget for this year of 60.5 million. And, of course, we're talking now about the novel coronavirus. Coronaviruses were identified a long time ago, in the mid-1960s, and are known to infect humans and a variety of animals. Since 2003, there were already 2 new coronaviruses for pathogens as pathogens for humans, the SARS coronavirus, and in 2012, the MERS coronavirus. The coronavirus identified in 2019 in December in China is a new strain that has not previously been identified in humans. And outbreaks of novel viruses among people are always of public health concern, especially when there's little knowledge about the characteristics of the virus, how it spreads between people, and how severe the resulting infections are and how to treat them. Is this now solved? No? Okay. So you can see the indication in our Emergency Operations Center that we are currently operating at level 2 of our public health event plan. Level 2 is the highest level where we have 3 grades working in 1, 2, or 3 shifts. Currently, we're working in 2 shifts, so we have still 1 escalation up here. Now it's really a pity if I don't have the slide because I want to show you a map. Pardon me? I don't think this was this. Okay, maybe I can show you later. I just wanted to update you. As of this morning, worldwide, we had 17,383 cases, confirmed cases of coronavirus, and 362 deaths. The majority of these are reported from China, and all the deaths are reported from Asia, 361 in China and 1 in the Philippines. In Europe, we have currently 25 cases, 21 in the EU, 2 in the UK, and 2 in Russia. And I show you what we are doing a bit later, because then you see our specifically created a web page, where we update on a daily basis the information, where we also ensure that the information goes to the general public, not only to the health professionals. Our risk assessments have been used by the general media and medical press to communicate also to the general population. And we have a lot of media contact where we also try to convey the message. The current situation in the EU with the 21 cases is that the aim currently is really to confine the cases and to prevent the further spread. That is currently the case. We do this, or let's say the colleagues in the countries do this by diagnosing the cases early, putting them in isolation, identifying all the contact persons they had, and following closely up with them. That has been done. From these 21 cases, we have 8 that have been acquired in Europe, in Germany, and 1 in France. All the other ones are imported. So for the time being, the situation in Europe is really under control. That I show later. Now, as the goal of the outbreak support of ECDC is to help the countries to prevent the further spread, our material that we produce is directed to do this. So we have, in addition to the 4 risk assessments that I already mentioned, where the last one was published on the 31st of January, also agreed on case definitions for reporting the cases, on contact tracing guidelines, and various technical documents that should support the countries in a more harmonized way how to direct suspected cases for testing, how to identify contact persons, how to handle the contact persons, and the last document was during the weekend on infection prevention and control measures in healthcare settings. We also have published a laboratory guidance for reporting on novel coronavirus, and as one of our activities to support and check the status of preparedness in countries, we have done a laboratory survey to see whether the countries are capable of detecting this virus, which is the starting point for the confinement strategy. I haven't seen the final results yet, but as far as we know, the countries can detect, and there are laboratories in 5 EU countries that are also willing to test the samples of other countries. We have also, in support for the countries, developed templates for leaflets for healthcare workers and for travelers, containing a section for travel to China and for coming from China. These templates have the possibility for the countries to not only translate them but also customize them so that they fit for the national context. They can be branded with the national logos and so forth. Currently, we are preparing a survey for the general preparedness in the countries, in particular the hospital preparedness. So all this we are of course not doing all by ourselves. We are working together in very close, actually daily contact with the Commission DG Santé, with the WHO Euro Office, with the China CDC, and also with the US CDC. We have also contact with the Africa CDC to understand their level of preparedness and capacity to detect and manage potential novel coronavirus cases. So, and now I need the risk assessment. Yeah. So I wanted to summarize our activities with the assessment how we see the risk currently in the EU. So the potential impact of outbreaks of this novel coronavirus is high. The likelihood of infection for EU EA citizens residing in or visiting Hubei province in China is also estimated high. The likelihood of infection for EA citizens in other Chinese provinces we consider moderate at this stage. It may increase over the next weeks. There is a moderate to high likelihood that we will see further imported cases in the EU. And if cases are detected early and appropriate infection prevention and control measures are implemented, particularly in healthcare settings, the likelihood of observing further limited human-to-human transmission within the EU is estimated very low to low. If these measures are not applied and cases are detected late, then, of course, the risk of secondary transmission in the community setting is estimated to be high. So, with this, I wanted to conclude the novel coronavirus. I could go, of course, in more detail, but that I leave then to your question. I wanted to highlight now a few examples of other threats. One of them is measles. In the past 3 years, we have seen in the EU around 53,000 cases, and 95 people died of measles, of a disease where we have a vaccine that is cheap and very effective. So that is partially due to the fact that there is a lot of information, wrong information, circulating, and many people are concerned about the vaccine. This is why in 2018 there were Council recommendations on strengthened cooperation against vaccine-preventable diseases. And as part of this Council recommendation, Ecdc is currently working on a European vaccine portal. It will be a European portal as a European initiative that we would like to brand as the source of authoritative information for anybody who wants to have information on vaccines. This portal will be launched end of April as part of the European Immunization Week. The other threat I have already mentioned, and that is antimicrobial resistance. One of the risk assessments that is actually published today deals with the assessment of the risk of carbapenemus producing Enterobacteriaceae in Lithuania, an outbreak. And the other one that will be published probably during this week is a multi-country outbreak of multi-resistant E. coli. And I just wanted to bring back to you that our estimates are that every year around 33,000 people die as a consequence of antimicrobial resistance. And the burden of antimicrobial resistance is comparable to the burden of influenza, tuberculosis, and HIV combined. So it's really quite a remarkable threat that is not as much in the media as the coronavirus right now. I also wanted to present to you a fact that we are also looking outside of Europe in order to protect Europe. Here we work either with WHO or with DG ECHO. And currently, one of our staff is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the Ebola outbreak is still not finished and ended. So it is now coming to an end, as it looks like, but it's not yet finalized, and this is have been now ongoing for almost 1.5 years. So then I wanted to highlight some other Ecdc outputs from 2019, because it should be a look back to the last year. All in all, we have produced in the last year 23 rapid risk assessments. Given the fact that by the end of this week we have in this year already produced 8, you see that this year it seems to be a bit more intensive. We had 58 technical reports on various topics, partly with public consultations. We had a number of written parliamentary questions, not as many as usual because of the change of the parliament last year. And we have published 86 scientific articles in peer-reviewed journals. As priority areas for this year, we have, as I mentioned, to tackle antimicrobial resistance, to work further in to the implementation of the Council recommendations on strengthened cooperation for vaccine-preventable diseases, support the Commission in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular regarding HIV, hepatitis, and tuberculosis. We are expanding into projects and challenges for e-health, and are implementing a foresight program where we try to anticipate for certain infectious diseases what is on the horizon so that we can actually prepare in advance. We continue to support the EU member states in cross-border health threat preparedness, and also work a bit in our internal mechanisms to see what kind of efficiency we can gain. Now, how much of this plan for 2020 that our management board only approved 3 months ago, actually 2 months ago, we have to see, because we are right now, since so many of us are working on the novel coronavirus, deprioritizing some of the activities, and will present to our management board in March a list of activities that we actually will not do. Finally, I would have had at the end a word cloud with keywords out of our founding regulation. Unfortunately, you cannot see this. The presentation will be made available to you, and I thank you for your attention.
So
now it's there. No, it's not.
So you start again. Okay, so, well, thank you very much. In any case, the presentation will be circulated very soon to you, because actually I have it on my desk, and it's a privilege of being chair. To be honest, there are very interesting figures and maps and so on, so it's worthy to have it circulated. If ever it's back, then you can use it and refer to it when answering the questions of the members. So we start with the contact persons for the ENVI committee, Madam Koszynska, for 2 minutes.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący, drodzy koledzy.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, Madam Director, I welcome you once again. We are in very regular contacts, and I'm very happy about this dialogue between the European Parliament and ECDC. Of course, I would wish our meetings to take place for other reasons than the threats such as the public threat announced by WHO because of coronavirus. During our meeting, you were talking about readiness of the member states to fight the virus together. You also mentioned the fact that some of the member states often offered their help to create the tests and laboratory tests if the member states will wish to have some cases diagnosed. So we see that this cooperation and mutual assistance truly do exist. We know such infections, SARS in 2003, MERS in 2012, so I am sure that our medical structure is strong enough for us to deal with it, but of course we always have to be careful. So 3 questions. Does ECDC, which is the Commission's executive agency, can it offer some assistance mechanism for coordinated actions when it comes to diagnosing the coronavirus infections of European citizens and those who come to our territory? But should the virus start to spread in the EU, what would you do in order to designate those who carry the virus, and what can we do to make the diagnostic tests widely accessible? You were also talking about your cooperation with the Chinese center. Are you in direct contact or just via World Health Organization? So these are my questions. Thank you very much, and thank you for being in touch with us. Thank you.
Thank you. As there are already 4 to 5 questions in one, and I guess that all of us would like to have concrete answers to your questions, that would be great if you could start with answering this.
Okay, thank you very much. The question regarding the laboratory support. It's indeed the case that some countries offered to also test samples from others. But in a situation where we don't have the single cases that we have now, but widespread expansion, in such a scenario, we wouldn't actually recommend to diagnose every single case. So here we would have to find, because that would just overwhelm the diagnostic laboratories. We would need to find an algorithm so that we still keep the development and the evolution of the outbreak under control. But normally you would not, especially if you have clusters, test everybody, because this would just be overwhelming. That was the same as it was during the pandemic, where not every single one was diagnosed, because if you have in a group of people with similar symptoms, one that is diagnosed, you would assume that the rest is having the same disease. So that we would then have to see how we trigger this, so that the resources are really wisely spent. And regarding the China CDC, we have a cooperation agreement with the China CDC and are in regular contact. We have received also the translated version of their situation report, and we know that the colleagues there are under quite some pressure. So our impression is they do all they can to give us the information that they have available.
Okay, so I start the Catch the Eye. I will read the list I have. Peter Liese, Jutta Gutteland, Mr. Sadas, Véronique Trier-Lenoir, Azekamp, Mr. Wallace, Mr. Rivasi, TMS, one more, two more, three more, over. The next one will cost a lot of points. Okay, so good. So we have the whole list. Please try to stick to 1 minute 30 seconds for your questions, so that you will have the time to answer in details. So let's start with Peter Liese.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And thank you that you took on board the point that I was raising on behalf of the EPP, that this be discussed here. I think a lot of people have concerns, and even though it may be the case that in other parts of the world there are more deaths, and we talk about antibiotic resistance as well, rightly so, and we shouldn't want to cause panic, but nevertheless we need to be well informed. So thank you very much for the information you provided. I think our task now is not to sow panic, but we need to make sure that the way that we deal with this in the European Union, we show that we're in control. Nevertheless, there are a couple of questions I'd like to put that people are asking of me. In my constituency, I have looked into this, and there are a few issues that really are causing concern at the moment. Can we expect a mutation of the pathogen that could be even more dangerous, or is that improbable following what your experts have said? Also, there are scientists who say that the Chinese scientists aren't actually giving us the real figures. So you've told us what's going on in the EU, and we can note what's going on in other parts of the world, and can we assume that the information is correct or not?
Jutta Gutteland for SND.
Thank you very much, General Director Amon, for being here to discuss these things with us. Very useful for us, given not just the exchange that we're having on issues that perhaps are not acute, more of a long-term nature, but where we need to react nevertheless. And in this case, it's very useful to hear the work that you are doing and the experience that we've now garnered in the EU that makes us more secure when we see viruses spreading, thinking about SARS, thinking about the experience we have behind us now. I think it feels very secure that that's covered by your work. I agree with the previous speaker that our task is by no means to spread panic. We need to be alert. We need to be vigilant, nevertheless. We need to make sure that we can disseminate information between member states, exchange good practice, make sure that we're protecting people against catching this so that the spread doesn't increase, obviously. And that's why I'm very pleased to hear your cooperation with the WHO. I have a question which I think is one you can wonder about. First of all, when people come from China, it's obvious that many people are wondering whether they carry with them the disease and whether they're prepared to deal with these symptoms, prepared to keep away from other people. But in a second stage, if you have been infected, if you have met people along the way, maybe there are people you haven't remembered who you've met, who perhaps then themselves won't be as vigilant. How do we work with that to make sure the second generation, if you like, the people within our member states, are also aware to the symptoms that might come about because of this disease? So I'm very pleased that you covered measles as well. That's excellent. And also picking up on what other speakers have said, antibiotic resistance. I would like us to focus to a greater extent on that. And I'd like to know from you what you want from us in the European Parliament on antibiotic resistance. I have read some of the points that you have said, but I'd like to know specifically from you now what you think.
Madame Riel-Lenoir for Renew.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chairman. General Director, we see that health threats are global and they require a single response. There are no borders that are recognized by diseases, and certainly at international level we need to work together. And I'd like to welcome the action of the European Union here, especially the follow-up actions that have been carried out. As a doctor, I get information from the health authorities from my country, from the OECD, the WHO, going to health professionals in my country to help them look after people who are affected by coronavirus. The posters are well done, they're very legible, people have seen them, but I'm just wondering about the implementation of some of the recommendations in other countries of the world, especially in the countries which are bearing the brunt of this, because when it comes to transmissible diseases, the recommendations are only worthwhile if everybody follows them. So, Madam Director General, do you have any estimation of how the WHO guidelines are being implemented, obviously on Chinese territory as well?
So I will take an additional 3 questions, okay, and then giving the floor to you. So, pour ID, Madame Bagneux.
Mrs. Bagneux for the ID.
Madame la Directrice.
Director General, the entire world is now seeing this outbreak of affecting the world health through this coronavirus outbreak. Things are moving so quickly that the information we have is already out of date, and perhaps this epidemic will become a pandemic in the course of a few days. A policy of migration and supple borders obviously increases an exponential spread of this virus. For many days we've seen reinforced checks being brought in on borders, especially in airports, but the ground borders and the intra-European borders seem as porous as ever. During this time, Russia has closed its ground border with China and has temporarily refused to provide visas to Chinese nationals. Without being overreacting, should the ECDC not call on member states of the European Union to suspend Schengen and at least in temporary terms stop immigration. What sort of measures would you recommend? Thank you.
En tout cas, je fais réagir, donc ça me plaît fortement. Je vous remercie.
I'm pleased to get people reacting. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Vas-y, pour les Verts.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Madam Director General. I think there are still questions that need answering about the coronavirus. I'm wondering if you have independent expertise on this. For example, do we know where it comes from? Because we've talked about bats, but then we were told it's in the Wuhan market, and latest information is actually it didn't come from the market at all. What do you know about that? Also, there are many questions about the potential for this coronavirus to mutate. Have you been able to carry out a genetic analysis and see, given the initial Chinese coronavirus and the one that has been discovered in France, whether it's already mutated? Then there's the potential for contamination. A lot of people are wondering, I mean, there are people who've come to France, they know that they have to be in quarantine for 14 days. Is the contamination 2 days, 4 days, 10 days? When it comes to the members of the European Parliament, while we're in the EU, we have medical structures which can cope with people, can take them into quarantine and look after them. But when it comes to ACP countries, Africa, Caribbean, Pacific, because if there are cases there of people being contaminated, it becomes a little more difficult. Do you have specific recommendations, if you like, to make sure that as soon as there's a diagnostic, you said that diagnosis is absolutely essential. You need to know if it's a flu or if it's actually a coronavirus infection. So I'd like to hear your proposals and recommendations on that.
Merci. The last question for the first round, Madame Hazekamp.
Ja, dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, thank you, Ms. Amond, for your information. I've got any number of questions I'd like to put on antibiotic use in animal husbandry, but also problems of zoonoses. I'll restrict myself to one zoonosis, and that is the coronavirus. We've heard that there was a market in Wuhan that originated from where there were all sorts of wild animals, including wolves and snakes, that are being sold there. Since the outbreak of the SARS virus, there's an idea that you shouldn't be eating these animals, but we know that civet cats were the source of the SARS virus in 2002, and yet they're being sold. Also, the MERS virus, human transmission, was from dromedaries to humans, to be exact. If we stop the trade in and showing off, exhibiting of wild animals, going to put a stop to the coronavirus? Should we not stop trade in wild animals and products from China coming to Europe? Would that not help? I think that would be better for humans, but also for the animals.
Thank you. This floor is yours. Easy ones.
Yeah, thank you very much for all these questions. They range really quite widely. And I go through to see what it is. Yeah, so the mutation, potential to mutate. It was asked twice, and I mean, viruses do mutate. At very different frequency, and regarding this new virus, we do not have information yet. It is, you have to, I mean, it feels as if we're talking about this already since a long time, but it is actually only 3 weeks that the virus is actually identified. So we have to also recognize there are a number of questions that we do not cannot answer right now. Maybe in a few weeks from now, but not right now. So this is certainly a question that we cannot answer right now, but it is one that needs to be tackled. because this mutation would affect the laboratory diagnostic and in the end also a therapy. So I think this is an important question. I can't answer it for you right now. And then the right numbers from China. I mean, we do not have indications that we get wrong numbers. You have probably seen in the past days, it has been rising actually in the past, like say 7 to 10 days, from like 1,200 new reported cases per day to from yesterday to today, it's 2,800. To me, this doesn't necessarily signal that there is something held back. It's just a better diagnosing and following up. So to answer the question concretely, we do not have right now indications that information is held back. But I mean, if it is, naturally, we probably wouldn't know.
It brings more clarity.
Well, it doesn't help, but I mean, we can deal only with the information that we have. And I think speculation doesn't help at this stage. We of course, are monitoring, and if there are any discrepancies that we see, we would also bring them to the table. So far, we don't see anything doubtful. The question was what to do with people that come to European countries from China. That is something that is in the end, of course, the responsibility of the national health authorities. What we have done is, unfortunately I can't show you now, this information leaflet where there is a section for how people should act when they come from China. And that includes that if they have symptoms of a respiratory infection, they should go to the GP or a hospital or a place that the country actually fills in this form, and say not only the symptoms but also the travel history. That we have emphasized many times. That is very important. That because at this time of the year, respiratory symptoms are very frequent. So if everybody with symptoms of a cold gets a test for coronavirus, the laboratories would be very quickly overwhelmed without any specific advantage. So it should be really also then said that the travel has happened, when it has happened, and to which part of China. That is the recommendation in these leaflets, that whether they take ours or produce their own, countries have actually put forward. The question was whether we have an estimation on how WHO guidelines are implemented in China. We don't. So that is something that is also something that we can inquire, and I will take the idea to actually see what information on this is available at WHO, but it's not for us to actually check on this, but we can inquire with our colleagues in WHO. Then there was a call for us to ask the countries to suspend Schengen. That's far beyond our competence as a scientific agency. That is really a political debate and decision in the end. And from the scientific point of view in Europe, this is certainly not justified right now. Where does the virus come from? very interesting questions, and everybody remembers at the beginning it was said, oh, all the cases have a link to this animal market in Wuhan. Knowing, as you mentioned, that the other coronaviruses in this century had, at least partially, a link to animals, it sounded credible. But then it became clear that can't be the only mode of transmission, because already from the first 100 cases, only half of them had actually a contact. So it was maybe there was at the origin an animal source, but this virus has actually the capacity also to spread from human to human. And I think that was very quickly also shown. And what we are seeing right now in China is definitely human-to-human transmission and not any zoonotic. The incubation period is, well, we learn about it as the time evolves. It is now estimated between 3 and 12.5 days. So what is now set in these containment and observation periods with 14 days should well cover even the longest that we observed so far. It might be that we will see longer periods, and then we have to adapt it. Some viruses have an incubation period of 21 days, so we have to adapt our estimations and the recommendations, the assessments, to how the facts develop over the time. Now, the ACP countries, that is certainly true. This is why we have the contacts with the Africa CDC, because, I mean, you haven't seen the map, unfortunately, but it's quite conspicuous that this continent is, there are no cases reported. And we would like, we have a beginning cooperation with the Africa CDC, also offer here the support if there are if there is anything that we can help. I hope I have answered your question, Ms. Hasekamp, on the trade with wild animals. It wouldn't help right now. But I don't want to say it would not be by itself a reason to stop, but I think it will probably have not a big effect on the coronavirus spread.
Okay. So there were also questions beyond coronavirus. I suggest you keep them for the last round of answers. Okay. So let's start again with Madame Cerdas.
Okay, thank you, Madam Director, for coming here and explaining this very thorough overview about this important outbreak. My question has to do a bit with what you talked in the past, in the last part, about other outbreaks, and concerning specifically the capacity of ECDC and member states to deal with other outbreaks at the moment, given that we are in the influenza season, but also, as you touched very clearly, on AMR and measles outbreaks, and how's the capacity here, and how are you dealing with this? And another question has to do, how's the relationship with China, CDC, if it's a direct communication or if it's from WHO. And if you know, I know this is outside of the scope of ECDC, but if you know if WHO has any personnel on the ground in China to understand if these infection rates and fatality rates we have been dealing with, if these numbers are accurate, and given this is an outbreak, if there's other personnel on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. For EPP, Mr. Polčák.
Děkuji, pane předsedo. Já bych se zeptal specificky k otázce antibiotické.
Yes, I have a specific question. Antimicrobial resistance. That is something that's extremely important. It's also important that the population perceive this as being important. You mentioned 30,000 a year, which is quite impressive, but I'm just wondering if the citizens know enough. Perhaps the EU should become more active here. maybe the EU should say specifically what this actually means for people, antimicrobial resistance, and explain them that they're actually responsible for it and the way they behave or don't behave.
Renew, Mr. Torvalds.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Madam Amon, for being here. Actually, I should have Marlene Dietrich in the background singing "Wann wird man je verstehen?" Why? Because if you look at what happened in China, we have actually the same pattern as we had last time. You saw the story in New York Times about the ophthalmologist who actually tried to warn people about it, and he was disciplined because of that. So you have, again, the same pattern of an authoritarian state actually putting down the information, and we don't know how many deaths we have from that case. And therefore, I think we should address this question also to WHO, because this is a deadly trap. An authoritarian regime is a deadly trap. Thank you.
Thank you. For SND again, Mr. González Casares.
Gracias, señor Ambon, por venir.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming so soon on the coronavirus to the committee. Sometimes we get bogged down in alarmism. Now, I think we know how this film runs. We have to apply our resources, our intelligence, and work on the lessons we've learned in previous cases. I can remember SARS and Ebola. We have our protocols. We know what needs to be done. All this panic about needing to close the borders and stop Schengen and so on seems extremely irresponsible to me. And don't forget international trade, which would grind to a halt if we took such measures. That's very unlikely to make any positive contribution, things stand today. Let's not open the door to alarmist, populist rhetoric about these devastating epidemics. They're not. Now, on the basis of our knowledge regarding the virus, as you were saying earlier on, when do you think we might get an algorithm up and running, given that we have the protocols to keep monitoring the disease? When do you think you'll have that diagnostic algorithm ready? On the most serious cases, having an input on the respiratory system, it seems to be the Mulster protocol that's been most helpful. Can our hospitals use that for early treatment of the most serious cases? And lastly, patients presenting respiratory symptoms are they actually responding to conventional treatment for the illness? I'd like to add one further point. We're talking about this coronavirus, but in Congo, in Africa, more than 3,000 patients are infected with Ebola and more than 2,000 have died. So may I ask you this? What are the forecasts for real remission and taking control of the Ebola epidemic, given that certain international NGOs are leaving the area?
You for the Greens, TMS.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Yeah. Thank you also, Mrs. Amon, for your explanation. As everybody here, I would like, of course, to know what the ECDC is going to do to contain the coronavirus, but you have given already a lot of explanations. But as I understand, the coronavirus originated from an illegal meat market in Wuhan, or maybe even another one. I would therefore like to take this opportunity to ask you about the controls of illegal imports of bushmeat, of wild animals in the European Union, and the control of diseases, case studies,
estimated indeed the import of bushmeat into Europe of approximately 270 tons per year. Besides being a threat to biodiversity, international bushmeat trafficking can be the source of new emergent human diseases that are spreading across the world. In 2014, after the Ebola crisis and the contamination by the virus of some of the illegal meat imports, EFSA recognized that the incertitude was very high on the real health risks associated with these illegal imports. The international trafficking represents an important threat to human and animal health, but also for the food security. I would therefore like to know what are the actions being taken to improve the controls and stop these illegal imports. Thank you.
Mr. Wallace for the GUE.
Thanks very much, President. In relation to the coronavirus, in terms of transparency around the outbreak and transparency in releasing viral genomes and clinical data, the steps taken, the early identification, isolation and sequencing of the virus, the rate of diagnosis, and the rapid building of the 2 hospitals, would you agree that the Chinese people and government are responding to the virus in an exemplary fashion and that we have lessons to learn from them? My second point, there was a concern in Ireland over the weekend. There was a flight came in from Moscow and there was a Chinese man on the flight who was very sick, and the plane was boarded when it landed. They were kept there for 2 hours. He was taken away and examined, and it was only announced today that he actually didn't have the virus. But all the other passengers, they weren't given any masks. They were just allowed to go on their way. I'm just wondering, is that normal? Also, the health service in Ireland, the HSE, their website hasn't been updated since last Friday. There's no listing of the numbers of suspected cases. There's no information about location. And I'm just wondering, you were saying that you work with member states, that the ECDC give advice, and you were talking about an information leaflet. I'm just wondering, what kind of instructions or advice have you given the health authorities in the member states, like in Ireland, and the issues I've raised around how they handled it? Is that okay? And I don't mean to be alarmist. I'm just wondering how you feel about it, and is it okay to handle it in that manner? Thanks.
Thank you. So you have 10 minutes to answer for the questions on the coronavirus and the others. No more.
Okay. Okay. So the question was how now dealing with the corona outbreak is impacting on the capacity to deal with the rest in the countries. And that is very different in the single countries. Right now, it's only 5 countries that are in the EU affected. And they have, of course, to put a large amount of resources in this. I assume that their monitoring of the other diseases runs further. But if there is an outbreak, it might be that they also reach the limitations. In these cases, if we get requested, we can, of course, support. But also, of course, our capacity is at a certain limit, and at one point we will have to prioritize what we tackle, not only from the European point of view, but also in the countries. And just confirm that we communicate with the China CDC directly, not via WHO. We have a collaboration agreement that foresees actually that we have such communication in these situations, which we have also used actually earlier on occasion of, for instance, all the avian influenza outbreaks that they have there. And I assume that WHO has staff on the ground. It's the regional office that is located, I think, in Manila. And several of our training program fellows, so the epidemiologists in training, are also ready on standby to go there. AMR, yes, the population should know. And we have actually every year since 2008 one day, and since a few years together with WHO a whole week, where this topic is brought to the attention of the population, but also the healthcare professionals. Because everybody, when it comes to containing and mitigating antimicrobial resistance, has their part to play. The patients, the doctors, the health authorities, politicians, the veterinarians, the pharmacists, the dentists. I mean, everybody in society has a role to play. And these campaigns are each year directed to a certain spectrum where we highlight this is now your responsibility. So it is being done. We see in some countries that for some of the multi-drug resistant pathogens there is a plateau, in some countries even a decrease. So it is possible actually to change that. And it is also happening. Again, the fact that the Chinese are quite rigorous in their measures is something that will not work everywhere. I doubt that something like has happened in Wuhan will work in Europe anywhere, actually. But that doesn't automatically mean that it's equal with withholding information. Our impression is that China, that was really criticized heavily after the SARS outbreak, has learned. I think in terms of sharing information, the sequence was shared rapidly. I believe there is a different pattern now than it was 15 years ago. Yeah, then algorithm for for the serious. Well, if I understood you correctly, you were asking also on the patterns of how many actually develop serious disease, which we can't say right now. It seems that it's, in general, the infection is relatively mild, but of course there are severe cases and deaths. But if you put it in relation to the total number of cases, it's still, the mortality is still lower than it is for SARS, although we have to be careful. This is what we're seeing right now. And as for the treatment, right now there is no specific treatment. It's treating the symptoms, also when there are severe, more severe symptoms and causes. But there are trials in preparation to see whether antivirals that are on the market would have an effect there, but we have no result on this yet. And there is, regarding DRC, what we're seeing right now is that the number of cases that are reported per week are slowly going down. It's a long tail to the end of the outbreak, and As you are aware, it's in a civil war zone where any difficulties in the security can at this stage still lead to a flare-up. So this is not over yet, but right now it's looking as if it's tailing out. Regarding the actions to be taken to stop illegal imports of bushmeat, there I have to actually pass, because this is not at all in our remit, and I cannot give you an answer to this. This is, as you said, more directed to EFSA and actually then also to the Commission. Regarding Ireland, I don't know what exactly happened with this plane, but the fact that the other passengers could go, I'm not sure they really just were left to go wherever they wanted. I'm pretty sure that there are some contact details and for potential follow-up were kept by the health authorities. And as for the update, the handling of the information is something that the national authorities decide. We can only make our information available to the countries, and we have actually a mechanism since 2013 with the cross-border health threat decision, where countries exchange information on what they do, what kind of measures they implement, and there we have received loads of information what countries have implemented. I can't right now recall for Ireland, but I'm pretty sure they have implemented also measures to inform the population. And I think that was hopefully addressing all the questions.
Thank you. In 8 minutes. It's good. Congratulations.
Should I continue?
No. So now I'll give the floor for the conclusion of this exchange of view to the two EP representatives at the ECDC Management Board. So I give the floor to Madame Kukovic and Madame Kopa for 4 minutes, 2 minutes each.
Merci, Mr. le Président Confin, pour l'invitation.
Thank you for inviting the ECDC to the public hearing. Thank you, Director Andrea Ammon, for her presentation. I'd like to emphasize 2 aspects. First of all, additional proposals in the approach of the ECDC, and then on my role as the representative of the European Parliament. After Brexit, it is even more clear that European citizens don't know the advantages of the European institutions well enough. The ECDC must get closer to the citizens and communicate with the public at large. A close relation with citizens with a multilingual approach, and the ECDC documents are only available in English. Citizens should have the opportunity to read the website in their own language, in particular older people. A convincing approach to communication with the public at large would be a major step against disinformation today, against when it comes to coronavirus. Enforcing European citizens' confidence in the European institutions, like the ECDC, is more necessary than ever in recent history. The second aspect that I wanted to tackle has to do the rules on communication between ENVI and us as representatives in the management board of the ECDC. I'm on the management board with Mrs. Kopa. I'm doing that voluntarily without any remuneration. I would like to survey ME and the distinguished members of the Parliament with information from the ECDC and my observations. The problem is that we don't have clear rules and a proper feedback system. If we had that improvement, we would strengthen the confidence and also the satisfaction and the feeling of security of European citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me say that I totally agree with what my colleague Zofia Kukovic just mentioned, because it is elementary to bring the big public in the debate concerning the health issues. So let me just say that in my view, ECDC is an organization that has the ability to adapt to certain threats and is able to transform itself. And we see it every time, and I think coronavirus is also one of these cases. The agency has a multifaceted activity, but my experience during the last 4 years there is that the two main centers of concern is the antimicrobial resistance and the vaccination hesitancy, which are permanent characteristics of the big European landscape and central themes, of course, of ECDC. Personally, I would wish that the European Parliament would be much more engaged and informed in concerning the developments in the ECDC and its works. And Mrs. Kukovic and myself, as representatives of the European Parliament, we try to connect the Management Board with the developments in the European Parliament and ENVI, especially after the European election. And I would like also to thank Mrs. Kopczynska for her interest in being ready to communicate with us. But we believe that we can do more for the European citizen, and how we can connect better with ENVI and with the large European public. I think it's the big challenge for each CDC, but also for the ENVI committee. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. So what about translations for CDC?
Thank you to both. We had this debate in ECDC many times, also in the Management Board, and there are quite diverging views. Because several Management Board members don't want us to communicate to the population directly. So that's one thing that we, we feel that we are in between. But I think in terms of the translation, it's true, most of our documents are only in English. We are reflecting on this, that we at least translate the executive summaries in all the languages of our reports that are more stable, because right now these documents that we do for Corona, translating them after we have received the translation in all languages, we have to update them. So at this stage of the developments, certainly translating is not a possibility and feasible. Also we tried with these machine translations, and for these technical texts it's just not helpful yet. It may change. But I also would like to really thank both Sophia and Marilena, because they really bring the views of the Parliament, what's happening in the Parliament, into our Management Board, and they're doing this really very well. Thank you.
Thank you. In 2 weeks' time, we will have a commissioner in charge of health issues, Kyriakides, Mr. Kyriakides here. And if ever there is a new development in the coronavirus, Exactly, and then if needed, we will re-invite you again if needed.
Please.
Thank you. So, as I said earlier, we are not going to vote today. We'll vote in Strasbourg when the composition of the new composition of the ENVI committee will be formally approved. Before moving to the objection request, just a formal announcement about the coordinator's recommendation of January 20th. We need to check there is no objection on the coordinator's minutes and recommendations, no objection, so they are formally approved. So we move to the request objecting the non-approval of propolis extract, and I give the floor to Madame Bruna for ID.
Monsieur le Président.
Chairman, colleagues, I'm presenting the objection of my colleague Joël Mélin, who has been held back by other commitments.
Room, precisely for you to be able to parler plus clairement. Madame, Madam Director, if I could ask you to leave the room, sorry. Thank you very much. Excusez-moi.
Je vous en prie.
Thank you very much. Chairman, colleagues, as I was saying, I'm presenting the objection of my colleague Joël Mélin, who is detained by other commitments, and that's why she can't present her text in person. I'd like to point out the important points outlining our arguments on this ununderstandable, incomprehensible decision of the Commission to not approve propolis as a basic substance. It's a natural substance collected by bees, which are animal food producers, and it has a number of virtues for hives and the health of bees. That's been proved and is underpinned by scientific observations. Secondly, it's authorized and consumed in a number of ways as a food additive, and it's involved in hydroalcoholic solutions which are useful for throat complaints, and you'll find them in pharmacies in Brussels, and it fulfills the security criteria for human consumption. Propolis is authorized for human consumption. Thirdly, the Commission and the EFSA talks about the allergic reactions, and there's a question of endocrine disruptors and genotoxicity. Without going through all the arguments, which, given this face of the Commission, and there's a duplicity of the decisions when it comes to basic substances. Why authorize glyphosate for 10 years, which is probably carcinogenic, and propolis, which is not even a food complement? And let's remember that the propolis as a basic substance only applies to certain plants, and these won't be eaten by humans. With the refused authorization, it's the second. It's not the first time that the Commission refuses the use of low-risk pesticides. So, can they give some sustainable tools to our farmers and make that a reality in Berlaymont, in the Commission? I would ask you, colleagues, to support this objection, and despite the political divergences, we put this wrong right.
I'm going to give the floor to the political groups, starting with the EPP, Mr. Measles.
Thank you. The objector is trying to rely on the common sense argument that if propolis can be used in medicine and other, let's say, spheres, it is a harmless substance also elsewhere. However, the European Food Safety Authority, which since 2013 was requested by the European Commission to provide scientific assistance with respect to the evaluation of applications received by the European Commission concerning basic substances, identified in its report propolis extract as a skin sensitizer. The Pol Energy, the French company which made an application, is expecting for the approval to use propolis extract in plant protection as fungicide and bactericide on fruits with a non-edible peel. Even if no other specific concerns were identified in EFSA report, the information provided was not sufficient to demonstrate the absence of, for instance, genotoxic potential and endocrine activity. Also, the available information on propolis extract did not allow finalizing the assessment of the risk to consumers. In the report, the concerns related to the substance could not be eliminated. In my opinion, in such case, scientific and technical knowledge should be respected. Substance should be approved only if it is beyond doubt that this substance is able to demonstrate the absence of genotoxic potential and endocrine activity. So I do not support the objection.
Thank you. For SND, we don't have any speaker. No. For SND, unless Michel Rivasi moved to SND. No. Okay, so nobody from SND. From Renew.
Thank you, Chair. Sometimes it's the hard future of a coordinator to be forced to answer this question like this. I think we have basically here a misunderstanding. In the papers, it's very clearly stated that propolis as a natural substance should be water soluble. In this case, that is not what we have in front of us. We have something which is ethanol used solution, and therefore the case is a different one, and therefore we don't support the objection. Thank you.
Okay, for the Greens, I have Uta Paulus.
Thank you, Chair. I think we should really adhere to science. So if there is a formal obligation to perform certain measurements, certain studies in order to get a substance approved, we should not discern whether this substance is of natural origin or of synthetic origin, but just keep to what science is telling us. And if propolis cannot, if the supplier cannot provide these studies, then he must not be granted an approval. So we will not support this objection.
Okay, for ECR, Mr. Vondra.
Thank you. We too will not support this objection, mostly based on the fact that for the propolis extract, the available information was insufficient for the Commission to conclude that the approval criteria for basic substances set out in the Article 23 of Plant Protection Products Regulation has been satisfied. But at the same time, to be clear, this decision does not, however, prevent the submission of an application for the approval of propolis extract as a regular active substance or as a low-risk active substance in accordance with the Article 7 of the regulation. So, to sum up, because it was done according to Article 23, we will not support the objection, but there is some open window for future, because we love propolis.
Thank you. Ms. Azekamp.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. Ja.
Thank you, Chairman. Bees are wonderful creatures. Life would be very different without them. they pollinate flowers, they produce honey, royal jelly, and propolis. They use propolis to seal the cells of their hives. Humans use it as well for mouth infections, for example. I can understand the thinking behind this objection to make it easier for people to obtain propolis. If you can just buy propolis in the shops, why should it not be approved as a basic material? But we have to be extremely cautious, not rush into things. We've seen, certainly in the Netherlands, how certain so-called low-risk articles such as vinegar can actually pose a threat to the environment. That's actually very harmful to bees and aquatic creatures. So all ingredients have to be properly tested. If the tests haven't been carried out, or if EFSA has reached the conclusion that there's not enough reliable evidence to rule out any genotoxic or endocrine disrupting effects cannot be ruled out, then we have to err on the side of caution. And should we be stealing propolis from the bees who've done so much anyway? I don't think we should. So we will not be supporting this objection. Thank you.
For DG Santé, Mr. Berends.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think I can be rather short because actually all speakers following the objector have actually more or less said what I wanted to say. The approval or the decision concerns indeed the approval as a basic substance. And basic substances are a very specific category of active substances in the Plant Protection Products Regulation. Their approval is not time limited, and there is no authorization by member states required. So after the approval, they can immediately be used for purposes of plant protection. Hence, the requirements in the regulation for the approval of these substances are very high. And one of them is that they may not be substances of concern. Propolis extract, according to the indications by the applicant himself, is a skin sensitizer. Hence, it is classified for that property, and therefore it is a substance of concern. So it cannot possibly be approved as a basic substance under the regulation. The other uses referred to as traditional medicine are also not comparable because they are for oral intake. Whereas this is about skin and contact with the skin, which is particularly relevant for fruit that have to be peeled. And lastly, there was an earlier assessment by the EFSA panel in 2010 that actually concluded there was insufficient information to establish any relationship between the consumption of propolis and the claimed health effects. So maybe to conclude, I would like to echo what Mr. Vondra in particular said, that this is a decision concerning the approval as basic substance. The door remains open for an application as a normal active substance or even as a low-risk active substance, provided that all the necessary evidence can be provided to exclude that the substance is genotoxic or an endocrine disruptor. Because that, again, of course, would prevent any approval as active substance. Thank you.
Thank you. So the political group's position is very clear, and
on Streatham High Road about 2 p.m. yesterday afternoon. The attacker has yet to be formally identified.